Welcome to our podcast journey through the fascinating and tumultuous history of the Dutch Reformed Church. We're diving deep into how a strict theological system spread from Calvin's Geneva all the way to modern-day splintering in places like Iowa and Holland, Michigan.
I'm really excited to explore that. It's like a series of dramatic acts in a long-running play, isn't it?
Absolutely. It's like each chapter builds on the last, starting with Calvin himself in the 16th century. Calvin left us with these hardcore doctrines: total depravity, predestination, and that whole idea where salvation is solely in God's hands.
Yep.
That set the tone for Reformed theology across Europe.
Right, and in the Netherlands, those ideas found a sort of fertile ground, correct?
Yeah, exactly. During the 80 Years' War, when they were fighting against Catholic Spain, Calvin's ideas really took off. By 1618, you'd have the Synod of Dort reinforcing hardline Calvinism as almost a national religion. It was a fusion of church and state at its peak.
But here's what's interesting. No matter how rigid a doctrine is, over time, people still find cracks, right?
Precisely. Fast forward to the early 1800s, the Dutch Reformed Church, known back then as the Hervormde Kerk, started getting, entangled with Enlightenment thought and bureaucratic control. And that obviously sparked a backlash among those who still held fast to strict Calvinist views.
So then comes the big split in 1834, the Afscheiding, the secession, led by Reverend Hendrik de Cock, if I remember correctly.
Exactly. De Cock and his followers were fed up with the dilution of their core theological principles. They saw the modernizing influences as a sort of spiritual decay, and boy, did they stand up for what they believed in. Despite facing harassment, fines, and even jail, they didn't back down. True conviction can be powerful.
That really is something. And then later, in 1886, there was another significant split, the Dolianti by Abraham Kuyper. How does that build on what de Cock started?
It's like this. Kuyper felt that the national church had become dead orthodox, too stuck in its ways, so he demanded a return to a form of confessional purity. The Afscheiding and Dolianti movements eventually gave birth to the Gereformeerde Kerken in Nederland.
Right.
It just shows the ongoing battle over maintaining doctrinal purity.
Now here's where it gets really interesting. Many of these devout followers didn't just stick around. They migrated to the United States in the 1840s, right?
Yes, they did. Tired of the persecution and in search of religious freedom and new economic opportunities, groups set sail to America. They weren't just looking for a new life. They founded, say, Pella, Iowa, and Holland, Michigan as strongholds
that's quite the
of their
level of
faith.
Commitment. And these towns became more than settlements. They were almost like theological experiments in building Calvinist societies from the ground up.
Exactly. Take Holland, Michigan, for example. Albertus van Raalte envisioned a community firmly built on Reformed principles, with its own churches, schools, and a very defined moral order. And believe it or not, they even preserved the Dutch language, had long sermons, and practiced a very serious form of theology. That's, pretty iconic in American religious history.
But even in these New World communities, divisions kept cropping up. There was that split in 1857, where a faction in Holland and Grand Rapids broke away from the Reformed Church in America to form the Christian Reformed Church, CRC, wasn't there?
Absolutely. This faction felt that the RCA was too worldly, too accepting of things like Freemasons and modern hymnody instead of a pure psalm-singing worship. They wanted to hold even tighter to doctrinal discipline. It's really a case of, wanting to keep their theological identity untouched.
And then the saga continued, when, in 1924, Herman Hoeksema got excommunicated over the issue of common grace. That event ultimately led to the rise of the Protestant Reformed churches in America.
Exactly. That split reinforced the idea that for some, the boundaries of what God's grace entails are non-negotiable. They held firmly to the concept that God loves only the elect, a principle traceable all the way back to Calvin. Though I wonder, doesn't
Yeah,
that
definitely.
stance risk being a bit too rigid in today's context?
That's a good point. It's like, can you really maintain unity if there's that level of rigidity?
That's the crux of the issue. Even in the Netherlands itself, attempts to reunite denominations led to a new formation in 2004, the Protestant Church in the Netherlands, or PKN, which was a merger of several branches, including Reformed and Lutheran traditions. But that
Mm,
merger, rather than unifying everyone, sparked major backlash.
I recall it was criticized for being too liberal, especially on issues like women in ministry and same-sex marriage, right?
Spot on. The conservative factions within these communities felt that the new PKN was compromising on essential doctrinal values. And then on the American side, the RCA is currently experiencing fractures over LGBTQ+ inclusion. Dozens of churches are leaving to form networks with even stricter beliefs.
So, in essence, from the very roots of Calvinism, with total depravity and strict doctrines, what's emerged is a long history of splits and factionalism, a chaotic maze of denominations, each convinced they're the purest expression of the truth.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so fascinating. It's not just a story about theological disputes. It's a narrative about identity, migration, and even how religious ideas interact with politics
Yeah,
and
it's
culture
like a
over
historical roller
centuries,
coaster.
with ups, downs, twists, and turns.
I love that analogy, a historical roller coaster. But I do wonder, don't these constant splits and ideological battles weaken the overall mission of the church? Isn't there a risk of losing its influence entirely?
That's a valid challenge. You see, while each faction believes it is the true heir to Calvin's legacy, the fragmentation often leads to a dilution of collective voice, especially in modern times. Yet paradoxically, these splits have also spurred a kind of fervor and deep commitment within each offshoot. But then one could
That's
argue that
true.
such zeal might sometimes border on intolerance.
Yes, exactly. And while some might see that as a testament to uncompromising beliefs, others might view it as hindering progress and broader unity.
Right. It's really a double-edged sword. On one side, you have purity of doctrine and identity, and on the other, you risk isolation and, well, a kind of rigidity that might not adapt well to today's pluralistic
I see what you
society.
mean.
It's a really tough balance to strike.
And what's really compelling is that this isn't just an old historical issue. It's alive and well today. Whether it's the modern debates in the RCA or the internal crises within CRC, these aren't relics of the past. They're very much the here and now.
Absolutely, and it makes you ponder. Can we ever find unity in a system so deeply divided? Is there a path forward where theological disagreements can coexist without constant splintering? Isn't it?
That's the million-dollar question. It really is. And it seems that with each generation, the issues adapt. What was once a debate over state control in the 1800s has now morphed into discussions about social issues, like LGBTQ+ inclusion.
Exactly. And the irony is, what began with the, bold radical ideas of Calvin now stands as a sort of battleground for modern cultural and political wars. It's like the same
Yeah, true
fundamental
that.
questions keep reappearing in different forms.
Do you think there's a possibility for a synthesis, maybe a modern expression of Calvinism that could bridge these divides?
It's tough, really. There's this inherent tension in the original doctrines of predestination and total depravity. They inherently set up a framework where only a select group is favored. It's almost as if unity and division are two sides of the same coin here. But perhaps there's room for reinterpretation without
That's a tough
losing
pill to
core
swallow.
convictions.
I like that thought. Maybe future dialogues will focus on reinterpreting tradition in a way that embraces both fidelity to doctrine and the need for inclusivity.
Exactly. And who knows? Maybe the next chapters in this long saga of the Reformed tradition will focus more on common ground rather than constant conflict, where unity
Yeah,
doesn't mean
one can hope for
uniformity
that
but a
breakthrough
respectful
moment.
coexistence of differing views.
That would be a real paradigm shift, a move from endless fragmentation towards a sort of dynamic unity.
Right, and it really invites us to reflect on how religious movements evolve over time. From Calvin's austere Geneva in the 16th century to the modern disputes in America and Europe, each split tells a story about how communities negotiate change while clinging to core beliefs. It's a remarkable
absolutely.
narrative of resilience, even if it's riddled with conflict.
So, at the end of the day, maybe the real question isn't whether Calvinism can ever achieve total unity, but whether the splits themselves can lead to a richer, more nuanced tradition that reflects the complex reality of human belief.
Exactly. It's a never-ending, dynamic journey of theological expression, where dissent can sometimes be as informative as concord. And that, is what makes this history not just a lesson in dogma, but a living, breathing discussion about identity, power, and the quest for truth.
Indeed.
A journey that's as thought-provoking as it is tumultuous.
Well, that wraps up our dive into the enduring splits of the Dutch Reformed Church, a saga that has both historical weight and modern relevance. Thanks for this engaging conversation.
Thank you for your insights. Until next time, keep questioning and exploring the rich tapestry of our religious history.